with another show on an in-depth look at the Pilgrims Society with War Hamster Brady. How are you today, Brady?
I am doing good and trying to stay cool.
That's all of us right now.
Everyone but San Diego, my little home in San Diego, where it never gets this hot.
Yeah, I didn't think I was coming to Nashville to be hotter than I was in Florida, but here I am.
Well, we got a fun show to get to. The second part of our in-depth look at the Pilgrims Society. What I wanted to do was just start going through the names in almost chronological order. But I'm not going to hit a lot of the English side of the Pilgrims today, but they're in there. The ones I named today are, it's chronological by their birth date. I'm going to go through because there's a lot of similarities and connections, and they really tie together just how pervasive Pilgrim Society has been into everything that happened in the 20th century. And
go ahead.
Oh, and you're going to see ties to everything else we've talked about before: the Fabian Society, London School of Economics, Skull and Bones. It's all interconnected. But today's show is going to wrap a lot of these things together again.
And I thought just at the beginning of this, I'd like to throw in, and again, you guys know we don't necessarily coordinate all of this. We do our independent research and then kind of merge it together in front of everyone. So I wanted to, because we did the British, and we're looking at the American side, and I want people to understand how they are not separate. And I found it has nothing to do with today's show, but I found the perfect person to show that bridge. So if War Hamster Brady will allow me, I'm going to bring something up. Again, I did pre-coordinate with him. There's a guy on the British side of the Pilgrim Society that we probably will talk about at some future point because he's notable in the Pilgrims, but his name is Lord Macon, and he was an All Souls Fellow at Oxford, which you guys know we covered when we were talking about the Fabians and their relationship to Oxford and the All Souls Fellow. So he has ties into that entire network. He also was a member of the Milner Group, which we talked about. So you can understand how important he was to the British side. He is a British pilgrim. He was involved in the setting up of the League of Nations, World War II, the setting up of the UN. He also he was the chair of a thing that was called the Ditchley Foundation. So the British has the same foundation set up that we do. What's more important is his son, Christopher Macon, who was a British foreign officer and a pilgrim. He was stationed in London, Paris, and Washington. He was the deputy director of the Trilateral Commission in the 70s. He was deputy director of the Carnegie Endowment Foundation. He also served as a high assistant vice president in SAIC, which we know to be CIA adjacent. He was the governor of the Atlantic Institute. He was the vice president and then executive vice president of the Aspen Institute in the United States. He was a senior advisor of the German Marshall Fund, which is a derivative of the Marshall Fund. And he has also served as the president of the Atlantic Council of the United States. So you see the bridging, just why that one person, and there's thousands of these people, that one person shows you in just a very short introduction to the show today, how that not only do they interbreed at the original level, but their sons and daughters becomes part of this operation and serve in all of these bridging positions into intelligence, government, media, and everything else. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brady.
No, that's a really good setup because it really is the entire story we're telling is these British intellectual elites and their cousins across the Atlantic, mostly New England, Eastern Seaboard, American elites, basically have their people belong to the same private clubs, do the same private dinners, make all the decisions in smoke-filled rooms, and they put all of their people in all of the strangle point positions to make all the decisions. And they have shaped the 20th century and the 21st. And then they're going to go out and tell us about our democracy. So it's all it's absolutely a load of crap that they've been selling us for more than 200 years.
A big load of crap.
Well, speaking of loads of crap, we're going to go through a number of crappy gentlemen. All right, let's do the screen share.
Okay.
Here I am. Okay, first gentleman we are going to talk about is going to be a Chauncey Depew. Now, we have mentioned him briefly in the past, but we never did anything real in depth. And he's an interesting guy. Obviously, he's blue blood. His mother was descended from founding father Roger Sherman. He's also descended from a guy by the name of Charles Chauncey, who's his namesake, Chauncey Depew. Charles Chauncey was the second president of Harvard College. So, data point. All of these Ivy League schools are completely connected to the same circles. All right, Depew, why is he important? He attended Peekskill Military Academy in New York. Goes to school at Yale. Any secret societies there, Colonel?
Skull and Bones, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, and he was one of them. He was classmates with two future Supreme Court justices, both David Brewer and Henry Brown.
Well, that's interesting.
Small world, huh?
Yes.
Depew was an attorney, known as a businessman, spent most of his career working directly for Cornelius Vanderbilt.
And he was his lawyer, correct?
Yeah, for the most part. He ended up becoming president of New York Central Railroad. So he was really deeply involved in New York Republican politics. One of the points we've been making is these societies, which the Pilgrims Society, Skull and Bones, they're going to be influential in both the Republican and the Democrat parties.
Yep.
And across the pond, we saw the same thing. We saw Tories, and which a lot of the Pilgrim Society were conservatives, and then of course you had the Fabians, who are Labor Party, would be our version of Democrats. So they're working both sides of the fake aisle. All right, so he received. Okay, this guy, how deeply involved was he? He actually received presidential votes in the 1888 Republican National Convention. He was a contender. He gave an oration at the unveiling of the Statue of Liberty. He's the guy that in 1898 nominated Teddy Roosevelt for governor of New York at the Republican State Convention. That's a big deal. Teddy had just, in 1898, just done the Rough Rider stint down in Cuba, which was part of the first American War of Empire, Spanish-American War of 1898.
Imperialism.
Yes. And Teddy was set up for a reason. This war hero, they put him on the ticket in 1900. He was basically placed as president of the United States. He would later run as the first candidate for the Progressive Party of the United States. So there's your great conservative, Teddy Roosevelt. Back to Depew. He was again, this is going to happen a lot. A lot of these guys are senators from the state of New York. And he was from 1899 to 1911. He was a target of William Randolph Hearst's Cosmopolitan magazine, where he basically accuses Depew of being owned by the Vanderbilts, which is probably true. And that made William Randolph Hearst enemy number one from a couple of guys like, Teddy Roosevelt and Senator Henry Cabot Lodge. They didn't like that. So Hearst is an outsider, and he's ripping on the insiders. That's about it for Depew. I thought he's interesting. The fact that he's a U.S. Senator from New York, is going to come up again.
Yeah, let me add a couple of things. At a July 11th meeting back in like the early 1900s, they were discussing the plans of setting up the Pilgrim Society in New York. Chauncey Depew and Lindsay Russell, they were actually in London attending one of their Pilgrim Society meetings. They come back to the United States, and this is critical to me because people need to understand the association with religion woven throughout this entire story. A guy by the name of Lindsay Russell and Chauncey Depew comes back to the United States and has a meeting with Bishop of New York, Henry Codman Potter, and we're going to get into J.P. Morgan in a little bit, and Grover Cleveland. And under the leadership of Bishop Potter, the Pilgrims of the United States organized their first formal dinner in 1903. So Chauncey Depew is critical to the foundation of the Pilgrim Society in the United States. I also had one other thing.
Real quick before you go on, I'm just saying to myself, another Russell?
Yes. Well, many of the leading Skull and Bones have also been Pilgrims. Vanderbilt's lawyer and Pilgrim Society co-founder Chauncey Depew is one of them. And this article says that Daniel Colt Gilman, who incorporated the Skull and Bones into the Russell Trust and co-founded the Carnegie Institution, is another. And it says former SS president, to your earlier point, William Howard Taft, a son of a key bonesman and founder, himself a Skull and Bones, is known to have visited the Pilgrims with his brother Henry, another Skull and Bones member, having been a full member of the Pilgrims. So there you have it.
Hi, Chauncey. All right. Next guy, who was one of the very prominent early Pilgrims from America, is Andrew Carnegie. Like I said, some of these are household names. We're not going to get into too much detail, but there's a few things that, we did a show on Carnegie a while back. So I'm just going to give a real high level. But born in Scotland, comes to the U.S. in 1848. He's about 5'3", little Napoleon complex going on. Moves to Pennsylvania, gets a job on the Pennsylvania Railroad, rises quickly, makes some money, starts investing in railroads. He made enough money, he was able to get into ironworks, or basically steel. And he's always known for his very long socialist speeches. In 1875, he starts building his steel empire. Used the Bessemer process, vertical integration. A lot of really innovative business ideas came from him, and he destroyed his competition. By 1892, the Carnegie Steel Company exists, and Carnegie's out there lobbying for continued tariffs to help him make more money. So when everyone talks about the tariffs of McKinley, whether they're good or bad, just remember who they were benefiting. There's good tariffs and there's protective tariffs. These were protective. U.S. Steel then becomes the very first modern corporation. The structure we know today is all these publicly traded corporations. This was U.S. Steel, and it happened because they were busting the trusts. They had money trusts, you had oil trusts, and this trust made it really difficult because you have to have a different trust in every state. And so the robber barons were too upset to see the trust system disappear. They just had to reinvent something new. And that would have been the modern limited liability corporation. Colonel, why do you give a corporation limited liability? Which means if they do something wrong, the people who own it can't get touched.
Right.
Who designed that? Oh, I don't know. Henry Frick, J.P. Morgan, and Charles Schwab. And they did it on behalf of Andrew Carnegie to take U.S. Steel public. That deal was worth about $7 billion in today's money. So Andrew Carnegie's filthy rich and decides to spend all his time on philanthropy. Now, of all these robber baron philanthropists, Carnegie maybe actually meant it. One says, a rich man who dies rich dies a disgrace. He was opposed to American colonies, however, we're dealing with the Philippines. He would join the American Anti-Imperialist League, which is interesting because on that with him were people like, I don't know, Colonel just mentioned Grover Cleveland, Benjamin Harrison, and honorary Pilgrims Society member Mark Twain. So kind of a juxtaposition, the Anti-Imperialist League on one hand and Pilgrims Society on the other. How do you mix the two?
To me, it's so hard looking back at history to delineate their positions when especially the Carnegie endowments and what they have been used for is anything but philanthropy. So to me, it's very easy to join these. Hey, we don't want to be an official colonizer. We prefer to do it under the radar.
We'll get more into the philanthropies here in a little bit because Carnegie then founds his big Carnegie Foundation for International Peace, which the Colonel and I have dubbed the Foundation for International War. It's founded in 1910. Have we had a moment's peace since?
No.
No, we haven't. So they haven't been that successful. He had already funded the Peace Palace at The Hague, which was focused on arbitration and international law. He viewed stronger global institutions and education as paths to ending war. And in the deed of gift, it says the purpose is to hasten the abolition of international war, the foulest blot upon our civilization. But he's working with the organizations that we can show have had their fingers on the puppet strings of humanity since 1902 at least, and we've had nothing but war ever since.
That's why I say it's easier to look at their deeds as opposed to their words.
100%. Carnegie was a big pusher for the League of Nations. The Carnegie Endowment would push for the United Nations. So if you go through the presidents of the Carnegie Endowment, it gets very interesting. First one is Elihu Root, who we spoke about a little bit next week, but we're going to go into detail on today. He's the president of the Carnegie Endowment from 1910 to 1925. The next president is a guy by the name of Nicholas Murray Butler, 1925 to 1945. So those two are going to be running the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace during both World Wars.
Correct.
After them came infamous Alger Hiss, 1946 to 49. If you remember the name Alger Hiss, he was espionage allegations. He was convicted of perjury in 1950 related to Soviet spying claims. You had a few more not big names. James Shotwell. Joe Johnson came in 1950, emphasizing policy research and Cold War issues. So that's interesting terminology because these policy research is being done by think tanks and universities. And basically they're writing these papers that politicians then put into power. A guy by the name of Thomas Hughes was the president, 71 to 91. He was big into arms control and changing, and what he said was the changing global order. And it's really interesting they got there in 71 because I'll make the case, and sometime soon, the 1971 is the day the Rockefellers started their move to actually implement that global order. A few other not big names up until 2015, and then we had William J. Burns, who talked about great power competition. Same William J. Burns would be Joe Biden's CIA director. And the incoming director of the, or president of the Carnegie Endowment for International War is none other than, do you know who it is? Do you know this one?
Yeah.
Avril Haines.
Yep.
She's been all over the sneaky stuff the last decade. She was a deputy national security advisor, deputy director of the CIA. She's the one that did the CIA torture report, of which 600 out of 648 pages have been blacked out.
Yep.
Yeah. She worked closely with Brennan on Obama's extrajudicial drone bombing, picking out targets, people that we could drone without any kind of hearing.
To include American citizens.
She's held multiple posts at Columbia University,
which we're going to get to.
We are. And of course, she was a consultant for Palantir.
And again, just hearkening back to what we were talking about before when we were looking at the Fabians, one of the Fabians' first targets in the United States was Columbia University.
Yeah. And we will talk about Columbia today at the end. Next guy needs no introduction, J.P. Morgan. I've talked about him a ton. He's a very early Pilgrim Society. Shows you how they were always involved. They had, you got Carnegie with the industrial base. You got the banking here. So all of these, we have education. All these big major avenues colluding with our British counterparts as part of the Pilgrim Society.
Elements of power.
Thing I want to point out with J.P. Morgan, and I've mentioned it several times on here before, but he pretty much orchestrated the panic of 1907, that he bailed, and that J.P. Morgan would then bail out the Knickerbocker Trust and stabilize the markets, made themselves the lender of last resort. Following that was the Aldrich of Vreeland treaty or plan, which created a lender of last resort. Aldrich, of course, being Nelson Aldrich's namesake. Rockefeller connections. Aldrich also was there on Jekyll Island when they started the Federal Reserve, which then became the lender of last resort. World War I breaks out. Morgan is the major channel of Anglo-American finance, and every bit of arms, food, whatever we sent to Europe to help the Allies, J.P. Morgan got a piece. So we can talk a lot about him. He'll come up again and again, but everyone knows the name. We don't have to go too deep into him. Anything to add on Morgan?
Nope.
And of course, another household name, Mr. John D. Rockefeller. We're going to do massive shows on him. All roads lead to Rockefellers. Standard Oil founder, big into the antitrust politics. He was huge in the expansion of the modern foundation philanthropy. So once again, the shell game. They create the foundations in 1910. Then they get the Federal Reserve so we can always have debt. The people closest to the lending of the debt make the money. Federal Reserve's in place in 1913. We get the income tax. So now his generational wealth is hidden behind a tax-free foundation while he's shaping. These guys are shaping American foreign policy using the tax dollars that we're now giving because of the income tax. That's the big shift they did. We pay taxes, they don't. And of course, the Rockefeller Foundation would reshape medicine altogether, reshape education altogether, how it's funded, who gets grants. And of course, he basically founded this concept of public health, which we saw how well that worked during COVID. Rockefeller really represents the industrial wealth that sat behind much of the early 20th century diplomacy. And that touches on a theme the Colonel and I have been hitting from since day one. Most of our foreign policy was done on the behalf of multinational corporations. That's why the original intelligence were working for corporations, or they were bankers, or lawyers, investment bankers, like how did I just drew a blank on that? Sullivan and Cromwell. That's why United Fruit. We did coups for them. It continued after World War II when the CIA got put in place.
Because the same bankers and lawyers went to work for the CIA as they did for the OSS.
And who did they take their orders from? Well, early on, it's the Council of Foreign Relations, which we're going to get to. But who sits on the Council of Foreign Relations? This same inner circle we're talking about,
the
right?
Pilgrims!
Exactly. So they're doing all this stuff, all this international diplomacy, spycraft, war, you name it, all the intrigue. It's on behalf of the blue blood old money. All right, move on from Rockefeller. We'll get back to you later, John. Next one, born in 1845, an Elihu Root. Root would be the Secretary of War from 1899 to 1904. What's going on in 1899, Colonel?
We are becoming an imperial power, fighting the Spanish-American War, taking colonies.
He is the guy that formed or framed the civilian governments of Cuba, Philippines, and Puerto Rico. How'd that work out?
It was really shitty for them.
Yeah. He would go on to become the Secretary of State, 1905 to 1909. Once again, you don't get to be Secretary of State unless you're completely connected to the Old Boys Club, and Elihu Root is. He would then be a New York Senator from 1909 to 1915. And of note, Root was a mentor to Skull and Bones Henry Stimson, who would go on to become the Secretary of War in both World War I and World War II. And his deputy was none other than John J. McCloy,
who goes on to be the governor or whatever you call him, the occupier in Germany, and so many other nefarious roles that he's played. The Warren Commission, everything.
Yeah, he's the John J. McCloy is the Forrest Gump of this stuff. Probably more than anyone, more than even the guy we started with today. There's a lot of Forrest Gumps though in this group. There really is.
There are.
Let's just this whole series could be called Forrest Gump. All right, enough of Elihu for now.
Well, hold on. Because just for the purpose of this, he was one of the founders of the Pilgrims in 1902. You mentioned he was the founding president of Carnegie Endowment. He also won a Nobel Peace Prize, and was one of the founders of the Council on Foreign Relations. And he was both a personal attorney to J.P. Morgan and Andrew Carnegie.
Small circles, huh?
Very small.
Ever heard of Jacob Schiff?
Yeah.
Jacob Heinrich Schiff, who was born in Germany. He's an American banker, businessman, and, of course, a philanthropist. Schiff was very involved in Jewish causes and most certainly was a Zionist. In fact, his father was actually a broker for the Rothschilds in Germany. He's educated in Frankfurt. Keep that name in mind, Frankfurt, because it's going to come up again. There are many Frankfurt ties today. Schiff comes to America, becomes a partner at Kuhn Loeb and Company, where he was associated with E.H. Harriman and many notable railroad battles with J.P. Morgan and some of his constituents and business associates. So Schiff and Morgan went head to head many times in the business world. And yet they both joined the Pilgrims Society, and Schiff is very pro-Zionist, which is going to be important because we'll get to the Balfour Declaration probably next week. So he was in railroad finance, big influence on progressive era capital markets, how we structured modern day markets. So he would finance Japan during the Russian-Japanese War because he was very opposed to Tsarist Russia's anti-Semitic policies. He was an early vocal advocate for creating a U.S. central bank. Made a speech at the New York Chamber of Commerce in 1906, and he warned of panics due to an inelastic currency system. When was the panic of 1900? Oops, 1 year later? Yeah. Remember, this is a rival of J.P. Morgan, warning us we need a central bank. And Morgan basically creates a central bank. His brother-in-law was a guy by the name of Paul Warburg, who was one of the key architects at the Federal Reserve. Schiff would then succeed Warburg as the director of Wells Fargo Bank when Warburg became the chair of the New York Fed. So he funds Japan against Russia because he does not like the czars. Then the Kerensky provisional government comes into power briefly in 1919, and Jacob Schiff would publicly support the Kerensky provisional government because they gave equal rights to Jews in Russia. Not long later, the Bolsheviks took over the Kerensky provisional government. And Schiff does not like this. He cuts off all aid and funded the anti-Bolshevik efforts like the White Russians. So a lot of places on the internet you can find that Jacob Schiff is the guy who funded Trotsky's return from New York. He's basically funding the anti-Bolsheviks. So why would he do that? And I'll just say that the banking records do not show any evidence that he was funding Trotsky, despite they did know each other in New York City. Any thoughts on that?
I know when did after the Bolsheviks took over, when they set up their bank in what is going to be the Soviet Union, their bank had their foreign branch, and there was a Warburg that was assigned to that. And I don't remember if it was Warburg or one of his brothers. But
would have been Max. Should have been Max.
Max, that's right. It was Max. And so he became basically their foreign bankers. And that's important because the Bolsheviks ended up basically contracting like the electrification of Russia with GE, and you had all of the U.S. railroad barons going over there and laying a lot of the railroad, and Warburg was one of the facilitators of that because they were basically taking the Tsarist gold, funneling it into Sweden, who reminted the gold out without the Tsarist stamp on it to pay the U.S. oligarchs to come over there and basically prop up or facilitate the transition of what is in the process of being made as the Soviet Union. And that's one of the things that I talk about a lot, is that if you look at how the funding goes behind the scenes, you end up realizing that they build these entities up and then classify them as our mortal enemy to perpetuate this channeling of money into the military industrial complex and the debt, all facilitated by the Federal Reserve, because we basically end up doing the exact same thing with China. all of the same players go into China eventually and build out the infrastructure, and then now they're supposed to be our greatest enemy. But they can never become our greatest enemy without these people behind the scenes creating the capability for them to take that position.
Yeah, they're the ultimate rent seekers. And you mentioned the debt. Once you start getting this form of government, which nobody's actually adequately named yet, some kind of a hybrid socialist capitalist model that a constant, it's a corporatocracy is what it is, and they have to continually renew and grow the debt, which can never be paid off, which means they have to continue to, basically, you cannot grow your way out of it under this structure. And once it gets so bloated, it's completely vulnerable and subject to fraud and theft, which is what we're seeing today. So I just wanted to emphasize, I long believed that was the case, that Schiff is the guy who had financed Trotsky. Yeah, thank you. You were a blank on the name I just said. It does not appear the more I've been reading, it does not appear that is the case. So we need to figure out who actually did fund Trotsky.
Yeah, but you understand, just as you were just alluding, there's vying factions within the Eastern establishment, right? So Trotsky was definitely funded. His kids were in elite schools while he was here. He had no visible means other than writing for some, 2-bit rag. And he lived in an apartment that had, we're talking the early 1900s with a refrigerator, which no one had. They had ice boxes. And so he was living basically in the lap of luxury, well above he was limousined everywhere. So there were Eastern establishment people, while Schiff may not have been, it may be the JP Morgan faction. He was definitely being a kept man.
Yeah, you got these Eastern Seaboard egalitarians, and of course they very much lean socialist because they want the world to be fair. This goes back to the Fabians, everything they believed in. Those are the kind of people, and the Fabians have crossed over to the Atlantic by now. These are the kind of people that would be sympathetic to Trotsky.
And there are overlaps between the Fabians and the Pilgrims.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all intertwined.
Renee says they're called cartelocracies. I love it.
Okay. One of my favorite heroes. Nicholas Murray Butler, born 1862 to 1947. He is a name that should be a household name.
It should.
He is known as a philosopher, a diplomat, and an educator. His great-grandfather was a Morgan John Rhys, who was a Baptist minister who preached about the principles of the French Revolution and anti-slavery. What do we know about the French Revolution? It was the first real communist revolution. The Jacobins were absolute predecessors to Marx. And I can give you more detail one of these days soon about who the real father of communism is, but I've got that for a future presentation. So Nicholas Murray Butler graduates from Columbia College, would be renamed Columbia University later, in 1882, and got his master's and doctorate there by 1884. So he's 22 years old. 1885, he goes over and studies in Paris and Berlin and becomes lifelong friends with none other than Elihu Root, fellow Pilgrims Society founder. Through Root, he meets and becomes friends with Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft. So everybody see how these networks are being set up?
Yep.
1885, he would join the Columbia University's philosophy department. 1887, he co-founds something called the Teachers College of Columbia University. The Teachers College had a co-education experiment of experimental and developmental unit, which would later become known as the Horace Mann School.
Yep.
Horace Mann, of course, was the guy who brought the Prussian education system over to America in 1854 and completely changed the way American education does. They teach you to worship the state, do not question the official narrative, all kinds of stuff. That is the Prussian education system basically being pushed by the leader of Columbia University, one of the Ivy League schools, and create
a pilgrim, Nicholas Butler.
And it would create what became the Horace Mann School, which of course later on becomes one of the best grooming boarding schools in the country, where dozens of Skull and Bones and Scroll and Key alumni went to school.
Correct. All going back to Mr. Nicholas Butler, Pilgrim.
Thank you. Who would also help create the College Entrance Examination Board?
Yep. He also was a member of the New Jersey Board of Education.
It then becomes in 1901, he becomes the president of Columbia University.
How long was he the president of Columbia University?
44 years, right through the end of World War II.
Isn't that amazing?
Mm-hmm.
We probably should also note that he started the Educational Review Journal because this whole, like the Fabians, their control of the literature and what is approved and what isn't approved to be able to have in print is critically important to their control of narratives.
1919, as president of Columbia, he amends the admission process to put a quota on the number of Jewish students. Too many Jews at Columbia, we're going to cap them out, like 10%. So you've got, that can be described as anti-Semitism, but he's in the Pilgrim Society alongside Jacob Schiff, who's a pro-Semite. Reconcile that to me.
They represent both sides of every issue.
Yeah. Which reminds you said something in our last show about that whole British model, controlling the education system, et cetera, and you said, isn't that what Israel's doing to America today? And I've been thinking about that because they haven't done it that well, because the entirety of academia is absolutely pro-Hamas. Jewish students are getting kicked off campus. Israeli, their propaganda is not working on the college campuses at all.
No. I didn't mean that from that perspective. I meant from like the 30,000 foot look. The fact that there is a, and this is so critically important to me, that the whole infrastructure of creating chaos is that you have one side cede this power structure, and then you bring in the other side to attack the power structure. And that's what I think we're describing here with this infrastructure, is because they encompass every side of every issue. You can, and they're, at heart Fabians in this gradualism mechanism. You cede the control and then you attack the control.
Want to hear more about Nick?
Yes.
1931, he tells a freshman class of students, and this is a direct quote: Totalitarian systems produced men of far greater intelligence, far stronger character, and far more courage than the system of elections. Pilgrim
Not about
Society.
one world government or anything.
No, just totalitarian. We want totalitarian systems, and this guy's in charge of educating our intellectual elite. We're going to go on and basically be in charge of the government and foreign policy.
And this is after the embedding of the Fabians at Columbia.
He would sit on the Pulitzer board, and that matters because Ernest Hemingway wrote "For Whom the Bell Tolls," which was about the Spanish Civil War, and it made certain Spanish general look bad. And Butler was actually able to get Hemingway's Pulitzer Prize recalled before he could receive it.
And can we say why he was on the Pulitzer?
Go ahead.
He set up, while he's the president of Columbia, the Columbian School of Journalism, along with dentistry. Those were his creations. So he is producing post journalism college, all of the future people that are going to work for the CIA to produce quote unquote journalism to enact and basically affect his totalitarian takeover of the United States.
And of course, the Spanish Civil War was about Franco and his fascist government, and he didn't like the fact that Hemingway made Franco look bad because he's about totalitarianism. And as we said, talked about last week, the whole point of the Pilgrims was this merging of England and an Anglo-American military, business, banking, and newspapers, journalism.
Yes.
And this guy is now the gatekeeper for who gets the most distinguished publishing awards. And they're basically saying, okay, we're going to shape the global narrative one more way.
And hence the Pulitzer Prize.
That's a big deal.
It is.
Okay, he's also a long-term delegate to the Republican National Party's convention. Basically went to that convention every year for 48 years, or every 4 years, every time they held it for 48 years. Nick Butler was the last-minute substitute vice presidential candidate in the 1912 election when James Sherman, who was supposed to be VP, died 6 days before the election. They did not win. Woodrow Wilson did. That was also thanks to Teddy Roosevelt coming in and opposing Taft.
Yeah, throwing the election.
Yeah, by running as the Bull Moose Party, also known as the Progressive Party.
Okay, so just go back to what we were just saying. So Taft is a part of this entire group. They need a Democrat to be in charge of the United States when they destroy it with the 17th Amendment, the Federal Reserve, and everything else. So they orchestrate the throwing of the Republican Party by the division, give it to Woodrow Wilson, who, by the way, is a Fabian, and he comes in and implements all of the shit, along with Colonel House, who is also a Fabian, that set about the destruction of the United States.
Yeah, and friendly note that Woodrow Wilson was the president of Princeton. So he was basically Nicholas Butler's counterpoint.
Yes. And yeah, so you are seeing in the early 1900s, they all belong to the same groups. And the fact that we even have elections is bullshit. They all belong. We just talked about Taft earlier. We talked about Roosevelt earlier. They're all the same people.
And all these schools have these massive war chests, and they're financed by the blue blood, old money.
The JP Morgans, the Rockefellers, all of those, they're all in the same club.
But it's a way of laundering their money. Basically,
Yeah.
the university endowments don't get taxed. So now
Yes.
I'm spending my money, I'm getting a tax deduction for it while I'm implementing policy that benefits my business interests.
Correct. And we're grooming the next generation to support the way I think.
I'm getting mad today.
But you know what? I just had a crazy thought. You know how I've been doing this whole series on the late 70s, 80s, and the crashing of the banks and they were laundering the CIA money through brokered deposits. That's what this is. That's what this is. These oligarchs deposit money into philanthropies and these universities endowments, and they are basically laundering / brokering those deposits to be used under the guise of a college to do their work, to do the scientific experiments that they want to have done, to do the research projects that they want to have done. They are literally brokering deposits into these entities under the guise of philanthropy to regurgitate garbage out that perpetuates what they want to have done.
And they're gatekeeping what gets researched, what gets taught, everything like that. And they also are going to get a payoff on the back end because they know where to invest ahead of time because they know what's being researched.
Exactly. That's what this is. Okay, now you're pissing me off.
Yeah, I want everyone to be angry today because this one's pretty bad. He would actually seek he tried to get Elihu Root to be the Republican presidential candidate in 1916, unsuccessful. And then he sought the nomination for himself in 1920, but was unsuccessful. Nick Butler, long credited, guy by the name of John Burgess and Alexander Hamilton for his Republican principles. So now I really hate him.
I knew that was going to do it. That'll push you right over the edge.
Well, Hamilton set up basically part of that system to set up his crony capitalism and push his, wait for it, federally funded internal improvements, which are not constitutional, and created the quote unquote American system, which I call the American system of corrupt crony capitalism. Good job, Hamilton. And that's who Nick likes.
Yeah, who else would these people have as a hero?
In case you guys don't know, I don't really like Hamilton people. All right. Butler is the guy who was actually instrumental in getting Carnegie to write the original check that seeded the Carnegie Endowment for International War. Butler would then become the president of the Carnegie Endowment for International War from 1925 to 1945. Small circle. Oh, and of course, the entire time he's the president, I said 1925, 1945. He's also the president of the American arm of the Pilgrims Society from 1928 to 1946. So he's president of Columbia, president of Carnegie Endowment, and president of the Pilgrims Society all at the same time.
Correct.
Right, leading up to the end of World War II.
Correct. Why do you not know this guy's name?
Well, there's more because some other stuff happened while he was president. And we're going to talk about another Columbia guy by the name of Wild Bill Donovan. Born 1883, lived in 1959, known as Wild Bill. He is the only American, I think, need confirmation on this, to receive the Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, Distinguished Service Medal, and the National Security Medal. And just as a side note, he also won a Silver Star and a Purple Heart. So, kind of an impressive guy.
And so Nick Butler is Wild Bill Donovan's mentor. So
Exactly.
he basically gave birth to Wild Bill Donovan, both of which are pilgrims. Wild Bill Donovan becomes a pilgrim as well. He also was a mentor to J. Edgar Hoover. Did you know that?
Do I have that in my notes, or did I skip over it? Hoover might be in there somewhere. Hang on.
Yeah. So he mentored both the external and internal intelligence capability in the United States.
All right. Background on Bill Donovan. Born in Buffalo, New York, to Irish parents. He starts at Niagara University and then transfers to Columbia, where he is a classmate of Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Yep.
This matters. Obviously, who's the president of Columbia at the time? Nick.
Yes.
He becomes a troop leader for the New York National Guard cavalry unit that would mobilize in 1916 and serve on the U.S.-Mexico border, part of the hunt for Pancho Villa. Wild Bill was very much known as a very, very, very brave soldier, almost to the point of recklessness, which is why they called him Wild Bill. So we're at 1916. He's now 33 years old, and he takes a trip in the middle of World War I to Berlin on behalf of the Rockefeller Foundation to persuade the governments of England and Germany to allow food shipments into Belgium, Serbia, and Poland. This is while he's actually had his National Guard unit called up. Kind of a weird little sideshow, huh?
Can you imagine being I know you can't, but being a military commander and having the State Department reach down into your unit and say, hey, we're going to pull this guy out and we're going to send him on a Rockefeller Foundation mission because, of course, Rockefeller's a pilgrim, Wild Bill Donovan's a pilgrim. So we're going to pull him out of your military unit and we're going to send him basically on a mission for the Pilgrim Society. And those quote unquote food shipments end up being an intelligence operation.
So obviously he's super well connected because now we already tie him to the President of the United States, the Rockefellers, our buddy Nick. He got sent back to the European theater. He would lead the 165th Regiment very valiantly, and the war ends. So post-war, he starts doing business on behalf of none other than J.P. Morgan. And what he's doing is popping around Europe, gathering intelligence about international communism. So the hot topics of the day are fascism, which is starting to grow, and communism, which is already, taking effect in the Soviet Union. You're going to find these people on the Council of Foreign Relations are very vocally anti-communist, while they also fought fascists. And we'll tie this knot together, why the seeming contradictions actually are not.
But he's doing this while the people who are sponsoring him are making a fortune off of electrifying and installing railroads in the Soviet Union.
There's no contradiction there at all.
None.
1922, he becomes a U.S. attorney for the Western District of New York, where he vigorously enforces prohibition and seriously pisses off a lot of Catholic people. 1924, Coolidge names the guy Harlan Stone as his attorney general. This is coming off the Teapot Dome scandal. So they wanted a hardline law and order, serious attorney general to get the reputation of the Department of Justice back. And of course, the Department of Justice has been absolutely scandal-free ever since. Donovan becomes Harlan Stone's assistant in charge of the criminal division. So he's in D.C. He does not get along with Hoover at the FBI. This is important because when Donovan would later found the OSS, Hoover's still in charge of the FBI. There is a rivalry from day one.
And, when I was doing the research on Mr. Nicholas, I'm wondering exactly what that rivalry is and what's the substance of it, because they have the same mentor. Was it real?
I don't know.
Yeah.
There's so much about Hoover being not even a closet homosexual, but I've read a ton of this conspiracy and the conspiracy side of things, books on Hoover, and the stories are just.
I know, but that's what I'm saying. We've made the case that they control both sides. The thought is that you need to project the fact that they're rivals of each other to make them appear independent.
Well, we haven't touched too much on the Masonic side of things yet, because we'll get there. But the interesting part about Hoover is he was, and all of the early FBI guys were Scottish Rites Freemasons.
Yeah.
And we need to talk a little bit more. I did a show on my channel a while back, get into that a bit. And we had a comment on, I think on my channel on our last episode that said we don't talk about Freemasons because that's where the root of everything is. Yeah, no, there's a lot of secret societies. They intermix, they intertwine.
That's exactly right. There's no one. There's a collection. And, that's the whole point of calling the governing body the International Syndicate, because there's not one religion. There's not one discipline like bankers. There's not one anything. It's a collective. And if you don't see the collective, then you're going to miss. So from a military perspective, if you're fighting a war, if you don't map out the entire network, all you're going to do is cut one tentacle off of the octopus, and people get honed in on one octopus extremity, and then you miss all of the others. That's the reason why we don't make that mistake. We look at all of them. But let me go back just a second, because I want to make this point. Donovan married into what is in their own documentation the wealthiest family in Buffalo, the Rumsey family. I did a big deep dive into the Rumsey family. Very, very interesting, and their own connections. Ruth Rumsey, and Wild Bill Donovan gets married, and that gives him, because this goes back to how these people marry into wealth, and that also expands his. And they have their own, the Buffalo City has their own, like a, what do you call that? Hereditary website that explores the control. Because if you go back to Buffalo during this time period, they had a train station as grand as New York City and Washington, D.C. They just recently launched a nonprofit to renovate it and bring it back to its splendor. But we drove by there when we visited Buffalo a couple of years ago. It's massive. And Buffalo was kind of the Western capital of New York. So that needs to be added to Donovan's background as well.
Very good. In 28, Herbert Hoover wins the presidential election. Donovan had supported him and promised him the attorney general job. But the anti-Catholic pressure in D.C., Hoover couldn't give him that job. So instead, he offered him the governorship in the Philippines, which is a strategic position. But Donovan declines that. And we've seen a lot of the who's who of our secret societies have been stationed in the Philippines.
Yes.
29, he returns to New York City in his law practice, and he's handling mergers and acquisition deals from the fallout of the crash of 1929. A lot of these companies go bankrupt. Well, the vultures are coming in and seizing the assets to rebuild from the ashes, almost as if that was a plan. And Bill Donovan is helping doing some of the legal work to make that happen.
He's like a mini Sullivan and Cromwell, his law firm is.
And he's connected. He runs for governor of New York in 1932, but loses. So more of the interwar years, he's part of an informal network of U.S. businessmen who collected intelligence on foreign affairs while they're doing business with their overseas counterparts. And he would meet with people like Benito Mussolini and a few other big names. Again, he's friends with FDR, despite their political differences, because they met each other in college. So FDR is the president, and he's over there doing business. And I'm sure they're having some nice informal conversations.
And it's important to know that he lost to one of the Lehman Brothers. So it wasn't like the syndicate lost.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like, hey, and again, it's important to, I pointed out earlier, J.P. Morgan was competing against Harriman and the railroads, stuff like that. That's fine. They don't mind a little competition because they're a cartel.
Correct.
The most important part of a cartel is, number one, eliminate competition, and number two, make a profit. Number one comes first.
No matter who runs, they still have control.
Exactly. That's the political cartel that runs our country, run by the exact same people that we're talking about. So World War II breaks out. First thing he does is he travels to meet with some key British officials. Met with King George VI, met with Winston Churchill and all of his intelligence directors. And then in 1941, FDR names him Coordinator of Information, which would lead to the OSS.
And it's
how deep do you want to go with it? Yeah.
Well, it's important to be able to set the stage at this point with the fact that their headquarters is set up at the Rockefeller Center. Of course it is. And that he brings in Allen Dulles as part of that. And if you look at Stevenson, the guy that the British sends over, who sets up his operation, kind of co-located with Sullivan, or Wild Bill Donovan, and they're basically hatching out this whole intelligence infrastructure collectively, and it goes right back to the Pilgrim Society. You have the British liaison for intelligence, Stevenson, sitting with Wild Bill Donovan, the U.S. intelligence guy, hatching the entire scheme, and they're all Pilgrims.
And almost the entirety of the British and the American intelligence is made up of Ivy League or elite British colleges, their professorships, etc. It's all academia.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's why the Pilgrim Society is so critical that people understand what it is and the purpose that it serves. It is a networking opportunity for these people to collude with each other. It's a bridge.
All right. We all know what the OSS did in World War II, and we've been talking about that for years. So let's skip forward to post-war. First of all, Bill Donovan was a major guy who's pushing for the Nuremberg trials. What do we know about the Nuremberg trials? They were fake for the most part. And a lot of the biggest people that should have been at the Nuremberg trials are getting exfiltrated out of the country. Operation Paperclip, Allen Dulles.
Yep.
So now it's time to set up the CIA. And Donovan tells Truman, this little watered down version of intelligence is not going to cut it. This is basically a debating society. It needs more teeth. He's arguing for the covert side of intelligence. Cold War is intensifying quickly, and Truman recognized the need for a stronger CIA. That's when the National Security Act of 1947 comes up, which is very similar to what Donovan was proposing a year and a half earlier.
Because Donovan sat on a commission that shaped the entire thing.
Mm-hmm. Donovan wanted the job as the director, and he didn't get it. Went to Roscoe Hillenkofer. Well, he was helping. I guess he was actually didn't get the job. He was still working behind the scenes to help Hillenkotter. The guy who ended up getting the job was none other than Allen Dulles, who used to be his subordinate. Had a lot to do with the fact that Dulles' brother was the Secretary of State. But then he gets offered the ambassadorship to France and turns it down because he does not want to work closely with John Foster Dulles. He does accept the ambassadorship to Thailand in 1953.
And why is that important?
Well, it's huge on the Cold War front, and it gave him relatively independence from John Foster Dulles. He would frequently visit Vietnam and Laos and the other countries while he's there. And the question, of course, is, was he setting up CIA operations throughout Southeast Asia from day one?
He was not only setting up CIA operations from day one, he was setting up the infrastructure to put Chiang Kai-shek in Taiwan and create the opium empire that the CIA still controls. That was Wild Bill Donovan's job in Thailand. During the time that he was the Thailand ambassador is when the first of what will amount to $35 million funnels into Thailand to buy and set up their entire national police force and intelligence capability to buy off all seaports and airports so that they can fly all of the opium in and opium out, weapons in for their covert operations.
Well, Bill Donovan, folks, he would get dementia in 1957 and die in 1959 with one hell of a legacy. All right, one last guy to get to. We got time?
Okay, hold on. I do want to mention one thing. Donovan also worked with what is called the International Rescue Committee. And that basically is the very beginning of the exfiltration of intelligence assets out of countries into the United States for protection. So that's very, very important.
All right. Next guy who also has ties to Nicholas Butler is none other than Herbert Marcuse. That's kind of interesting. What are those connections? All right, Marcuse, born in Germany, 1898, is a philosopher, social critic, and political theorist. He became a prominent school figure at a place called the Frankfurt School. We all know this story. He criticized capitalism, modern technology, Soviet communism. Not just communism, but Soviet communism. He criticized popular culture and argued they represent new forms of social control. He is the guy who develops the model for critical social theory that we're living through today. This is the father of the social woke movement in America that we have to hear about every day. It's Marcuse. He was also critical of German Nazism. So he's not going to last long in Hitler's Germany. He comes over to Columbia University with 8 other Frankfurt School professors and joins the staff of Columbia University in 1934.
Oh my goodness. Home of the Fabians, home of the Pilgrims Society? Color me shocked.
And the same place that the founder of OSS, which co-founded the CIA, which also pushed a lot of these social movements on America to basically destroy the actual American values. Same CIA, all comes from Columbia University. Got to be a coincidence.
And he actually works with the OSS.
Yep, 1943. Herbert Marcuse goes to work for the OSS. And again, this guy is a full-on, I don't know what do you want to call him, soft communist, or he's different than a Fabian, but
He's a Marxist. He's a Marxist.
Yeah, it's a good one. He prints something called, he's critical of the Soviet Union, which is interesting for a Marxist. He doesn't think you haven't done communist correctly yet. That's where that comes from.
Yes.
He wrote Soviet Marxism, a critical analysis. That's the book. And he works with a couple of guys named Franz Neumann and Otto Kirchheimer. You probably talked about Kirchheimer before, right?
A little bit.
They basically were talking about post-war strategies, what they call denazification, which is what they applied in Germany, Western Germany. How do you denazify?
Well, we don't know because we never did it.
But they're saying they did. They're using social science methods to inform Allied policy. And I say the social science methods actually did work, because if you look at how Germany, or Germans, are so wussified at this point in time that they're allowing their country to be completely invaded, they basically, denazification means take out the testosterone from an entire society. And they did that using social science methods.
Okay, so you're really talking about two different things. It's kind of like cloaking an effort to do one thing under a readily accessible or acceptable thing like denazifying. They weren't actually denazifying. We know that. They left the Nazis in every part of the structure of West Germany. So they are using that as a cloaking device to change Germany socially.
So what they're basically doing at this point in time is they're creating the false right-left dynamic.
Yes.
Nazism is now on the right, where it was always on the left. It was always a socialist. And
Yes.
by doing that contrast, so they're going to say Nazi bad, so you must be socialist. And that's what's happened throughout Europe. They can just make Nazism the boogeyman now that it's considered by them on the right. And Marcuse is one of the guys most responsible for that.
Yes.
You can read all of their collections of socialist nonsense called Secret Reports on Nazi Germany. Gets out of the war. Marcuse goes and teaches at Harvard. 1964-65, he's at Brandeis University, elite school in Massachusetts. He writes his famous book called One Dimensional Man. It's there that he teaches Angela Davis, one of the biggest leaders of the protest movement of the 60s. So he becomes like the preeminent theorist of what's called the New Left in the 1960s.
And he
inspires student movements in Germany.
Just keep in mind, he's an intelligence asset.
Yeah. Really important point, because once you're in the CIA,
you're always in the CIA.
So he inspires, his writing is the inspiration for the student movements in Germany, France, and the United States. They call him the father of the New Left. So no more Bolshevik Marxism. This is the New Left. And that's the stuff we're dealing with today.
Yes.
This intelligence assets, which is getting student protests in the streets, which have now been perfected to put on what we've been termed color revolutions all over the friggin' world, inspired by Herbert Marcuse.
Pilgrim.
He was not a pilgrim. He's just a Columbia University guy. I do not ever have him in the Pilgrims, but he may as well be. So 1965 to 1970, he teaches at a place called the University of California, San Diego. That campus is less than 6 miles from where my parents lived up until a couple of years ago, where I kind of grew up. This is where he gets deep into the theory of class struggle. He rejects the class struggle theory of Karl Marx, and he says he regards the realization, this is where he gets crazy. He regarded the realization of man's erotic nature as the true liberation of humanity. We're getting into this eroticism again.
We're going to bring sex into it.
Of course. So this inspired all the fellow utopians. His critiques of capitalist society resonates with the student movement of the 1960s, and he is the inspiration for 1969 Summer of Love. Interestingly, in 1968, California's Governor Ronald Reagan objected to his reappointment to be a professor at UCSD, but the college let him stay until 1970. So Reagan knew the guy was trouble. Marcuse felt societal reform may be found among the outcasts of society. Have you seen The Woke Left? Nose rings. It's a coalition of outcasts. This comes from Marcuse. So he's a big supporter of the feminist movement because they basically thought that his work contributed what they call social feminism. So it became more than women's rights and letting women do what they want, but more it had to be part of a socialist movement. Basically say that Marcuse is the father of Karens.
I love that.
Good. I came up with that myself.
Can I go back just 1 minute? Because when I was looking this guy up on another research project, one of the things, if anybody's interested in this, or him specifically, is the thing that he published called Reason and Revolution. Because when I first came across the Hegelian dialect on how they control both the right and the left and push us all in the middle, he also wrote a very famous publication called The Reason and Revolution that basically went through both Hegel and Marx. And I came across that a long time ago when I mean, like at the very beginning of this. That's where I first learned who this guy was.
Yeah, that's why we spend so much time on those older philosophers, because everything starts with the branches of the trees are the intertwined. There's a lot of crossover. So interesting guy. Marcuse, the intelligence agent, set off a lot of protests trying to destabilize the United States of America. Why do you want to do that? Because you have got to weaken the sovereign states in order to implement your one world government.
Correct.
Circles all the way back to the Pilgrims' initial mission statement. Some criticism of Marcuse. A guy by the name of Kolakowski describes Marcuse of inventing, and this is a quote, inverted Freudian reading of human history where all social rules could and should be discarded to create a new world of happiness. Utopians. Kolakowski goes on to say, Marcuse's ideal society is to be ruled despotically by an enlightened group who have realized in themselves the unity of logos and eros and thrown off the vexatious authority of logic, mathematics, and empirical sciences. Logos and eros. Sex. Another historian, Alistair MacIntyre, says, in quotes, Marcuse invokes the great names of freedom and reason while betraying their substance at every important point. They're basically saying he is a charlatan selling free love and utopia. Unfortunately, a ton of people across the colleges in America and the world have bought into what Marcuse said, and all flows downhill from Columbia University, the Pilgrims Society, and of course our good friend, Mr. Nicholas Butler.
Yep.
That's all I have for today.
All right. So I'm going to read, just to kind of push all of this together. There was now we've already decided that Carroll Quigley is kind of, while historically accurate about these different groups, is kind of an apologist for him. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think if you're going to get into history, you have to read Quigley, but
yes.
You should do it with a grain of salt that the Colonel just described.
Yes. Okay. So this is a quote from Quigley about the Round Table groups and the Fabians, the Pilgrims, all of these people. At the risk of some repetition, the story will be summarized here because the American branch of the Pilgrims Society, sometimes called the Eastern Establishment, has played a very significant role in history of the United States in the last generation. The Round Table groups were semi-secret discussions and lobbying groups. The original purpose of these groups was to seek to federate the English-speaking world along lines laid down by Cecil Rhodes and William Stead. And the money for the organizational work came originally from the Rhodes Trust. The chief backbone of this organization grew up along the already existing financial cooperation running through the Morgan Bank in New York to a group of international financiers in London led by the Lazard brothers. This group wielded great influence because it controlled the Rhodes Trust, the Viet Trust, the Times of London, etc. The influential and highly anonymous quarterly reviews known as the Round Table, founded in 1910 with money supplied by Sir Abe Bailey and the Rhodes Trust. And it dominated the Royal Institute of International Affairs, called the Chatham House, and the Carnegie United Kingdom Trust, and the All Souls College at Oxford. The aim of these international men was nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. The system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world's acting by secret agreement arrived at frequent private meetings, dinners, and conferences. And
yeah,
that's perfect summary.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Just checking the chat. A lot of nice people appreciate it. I think next week, let's sum up. Well, you just summed up everything we said today and wrap everything up. I think next week ought to be the show on the Roundtable and the Council of Foreign Relations.
I think that would be a great, because it's laden with everybody that we just talked about.
Yeah, and I thought to bring in some of the, I would do some bios on some of the British and the English side. People understand it. It's a lot easier for me especially, to do the bios on people in America, because I know American history far better than I do British. And so I may be wrong when I talk about some things in England, because it's a different country and I don't know its history anywhere near as well. But it is important. And I think we'll have to hit on some of those important founding names.
Yep, I agree. Sounds like a plan.
Good. Hey, made it in 90 minutes. I didn't think I'd be able to do it, or we'd be able to.
Done. Another one in the books. Thank you so much, Warhamster Brady, for all your hard work on these shows. I know the audience appreciates it. I get so much feedback on other shows that I go on about this series of how incredible it is as far as tying all of these pieces together. So it's there now forever for people to be able to use and see how the real world works.
Yeah, I don't know if when we first started, we thought we'd get to where we are today, but I don't even think we're close to done yet. There's too many things to talk about. And I want to do the Rockefeller so bad.
But I made him do these as the foundation so that everybody understands this. And I agree with Brady. The Rockefellers are foundational from an American and world perspective, because they've had their hands in literally everything. But to Brady's point, and he's made this point many times, it is so critical that we go back in time. I've had somebody else ask a couple of times in the chat whether Smedley Butler is related to Nicholas Butler. I do not know that. Maybe they are, but I don't know that.
I did not see any reference to that. And then we've talked about Smedley Butler quite a bit, Rob. You know, it's been like from when I first started going. You can go back to the oldest shows on my channel, and I talk about Smedley Butler.
Yeah.
You know,
he's a critical player in this whole thing. It wouldn't surprise me. But I did look, by the way, but I did not see that relationship. Doesn't mean it's not there. I'm not a genealogist.
Well, you can't even trust a genealogist sites 100%. Normally, names that big, you'd think someone would have made the connection by now. And I have never even heard it. So I'm going to say no.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.
See you later.